Welcome to this GOGA learning session led by Simon Tanner from Wavehill and focused on reaching the very least active, disabled and non-disabled people.
Thanks, Kat.
So Simon, what have been the most standout approaches that partners have used to engage the very least active people in their GOGA programs?
Okay, well, what we've picked up from the evaluation evidence that we've collected so far and is still coming through to us is that there's kind of three key things that come out of what we found from the evaluation. First one is very much about how deep you're getting into your communities, looking at the depth of the community engagement that you're managing to establish. And that's happening in a couple of ways particularly. Firstly, very much about targeting trusted community groups and organisations. So ones that have places and particular reputations, good reputations in the areas that you're trying to work in. Often these are not in the activity field, so they're not necessarily always associated with physical activity or sports activities. But there's somebody that often is a good voice for the community within the area that you're working. But what you're also looking at is trying to use that proactively. So you're the ones who are reaching out. You're trying to find those individuals, those organisations who you think might know the target groups that you're looking to work with best. But what it's also about is looking at ways in which you can get your GOGA staff and your activities out into those communities. But what you're trying to do is by building those links with the trusted community groups, you're looking for them to advocate or broker your links with those target groups and into the communities. The second area is very much about where we've seen a real sense that for those projects that are really driving forward the fastest, again, they're particularly looking outside the sports field to build those connections. And particularly it's looking at areas around, in particular things related to care homes, sheltered housing, specialist health teams. We've got instances of organisations reaching out to caravan parks. And what it's looking for is those locations where you think, through the expertise that you've built up, but equally recommendations from those community partners, where you might be able to find some of those individuals. Now, I appreciate there might be some nervousness around reaching out to some of those organisations and communities, particularly if you've not had contact with them before. There's a lot of unfamiliar challenges there, and there's a sense that developing those partnerships could act as a barrier to sort of taking these things forward. So there's ways of looking at that. But I think one of the ways about sort of tackling that is very much to look at the expertise you have within your organisation. So if you're in a local authority, look at the teams in your housing departments that might be able to establish some of those contacts for you, or offer you some advice about where you might go to make those contacts. So it's using that specialist expertise locally. And then the final point is very much about the nature of the activities that you then run. And there's a real sense that we picked up very strongly across the interviews that we've done and the evidence that we've collected, and also talking to participants themselves, is that it's a real sense of trying to get away from being the activity that you're running being too intense at first, or for that activity being presented as the only opportunity that arises from the project that's being set up or people are being invited to. Very much in terms of what we've seen is success coming from a focus on the social element first. So a bit of tea and cake, a bit of a chat, a bit of conversation about where they are in the local community, things that they've been involved in. And then bringing in a gentle introduction of activity. Firstly, finding out about things that those individuals have done in the past and what they've found about those, whether they've enjoyed them or not, and the reasons for that. But then moving on to perhaps focusing upon, say, 5 minutes of activity towards the end of the session. And then over a period of time, over a number of sessions, building the amount of activity up over time so that it becomes a greater part of the session that's being run. So you move to 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And the social element is always there to underpin those kinds of things.
Great, thank you, Simon. So how can we use data and evidence to help us to be more effective in reaching the least active for our GOGA programs?
Well, I think in terms of what we've learned so far from our own data collection in terms of the evaluation, I think there's a couple of things that people will be able to do, particularly around the monitoring evaluation data. Yes, we appreciate it's a challenge. It's difficult to get some individuals to complete some of these forms. But I think the key thing is it's particularly useful for people to help you shape your program, get an appreciation of who you're actually involving. And the ways in which you do that is very much about, well, getting analytical. So having a look at your monitoring data, what does it tell you about who you have reached? And more importantly, who you haven't reached, and particularly in relation to groups that you might have tried to reach out to. What is your monitoring data showing you about the gender profiles of the groups you've reached, the ethnicity profiles, their activity profiles? And equally, looking beyond that monitoring evaluation, so talked about earlier about how you might reach out to other departments within your organisation or local authority if you're working for one. Do those others have any data or knowledge that you could use that give you some pointers about how you might be able to track individuals down, where they're located? So your housing department may well know where certain older groups are more likely to reside within your area and the kinds of places that you might be able to find them, particularly community settings where you might be able to identify those individuals. And then the other thing, for those of you that are on Upshot, there are some very sort of particular powerful tools there in terms of some of the mapping facilities, particularly around your participants, so you can gain some quick insight into the engagement of the participants that you have managed to reach, looking very specifically at their geography there. But what it's also about is thinking about, well, where have we established new partnership working within the local authority? Are we seeing that starting to pick up individuals on particular housing estates or particular community settings that the local authority is involved in? But equally, if we're working with other local organisations, we know where they're located. Is there anything that's coming up on the mapping that we're seeing there? And then equally, it comes through into the way in which you could look at that mapping in terms of identifying mechanisms to do consultation, where you might pick groups up, and particularly looking at, from an analytical point of view, what facilities are located in those kinds of areas where you are picking up participants. Are some of those barriers to their participation? And we've seen other examples within certain localities where, although a park's been right next door to a particular location where activities are being run, it's become very clear because of the entrances of that park, those individuals have not been readily able to use that facility because it's been a very long walk to get to the entrance of the park. So it's kind of including those thought processes in the things that you're looking to do, and using as many mechanisms to enable you to do that. What illustrations does Upshot give you of questions that you could then pose to other members of your organisation or other departments within your organisation? And then obviously that feeds through into delivery, but also particularly, and this is where we really need to start focusing on this, is very much around the sustainability of the activities. What insight does the mapping show where you're drawing individuals from, and what might be some of the key sustainability challenges? Is it highlighting that there might be some major transport issues around those individuals continuing to attend? Or is it other things related to local developments that might be happening in the area that might put other things in the way of some of the things that you're looking to run? So to sum up, I think it's very much about use what you've got there, think more readily about your monitoring and evaluation data, not just as something that you have to report on a quarterly basis, but it's something that you can use on a regular basis to review your activity and help you plan for the future. And then that will help you identify areas where you could target low active or inactive groups, and particularly areas where your partnership working hasn't yet touched if you're looking to review those aspects. And that will then put together some steps forward that you can then move the GOGA program on from the successes you've already had.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for your input. If you've got any questions, please contact us using these details.